Lastly, I would like to move to something which I personally believe is a very important topic, and is also something, luckily, the LCA is very much involved in, diversity. That is not exclusively gender diversity, although obviously gender diversity is an important part of diversity. I'd like to talk a little bit with you about your involvement in the various diversity initiatives that are around. You're obviously familiar with the pledge, which I'm sure you have signed, WilmerHale has signed, the LCA has signed. That's just one of these initiatives. What do you think about them?
Well, I'm very grateful for, I think it was one of your wonderful initiatives actually, getting the pledge out there. I think about diversity actually also in a more global way, and I think I always say my most important diversity initiative is being in my professional life. In my professional life, on a daily basis, I can do certain things to make sure that this is a more inclusive community. And when I say inclusive, I actually do mean a diversity across the board. I don't necessarily only mean gender diversity, but diversity really across the board. And so I have a couple of things that I do when I, for instance, look for a speaker or look for a chairperson. I also am lucky enough, for instance, with my students to be in touch with students from all around the world. We have 90 plus nationalities at Queen Mary, which is really great. And so being able to train and educate young people from all around the world to a certain extent helps build up that diversity. They will go back in their home jurisdictions to their law firms or to their governments and to their companies, and they would not have been able to get that sort of specialized education there. So in providing them that education, we also make sure that the sort of people in the know, the sort of arbitration community, expands and becomes more diverse. Now, this little trick I just mentioned in terms of what I do on a daily basis, and a couple of things, but one thing, and I learned this from Wendy Miles QC, former colleague, is whenever I sort of select a chair or a speaker, I put together a list, sort of internally, my own list, and I start writing out a couple names, and they are, the usual suspects. And here comes Wendy Miles' rules. Think again. Think that there are people out there that you're missing, that are maybe in a different jurisdiction, that are maybe in a little outside your comfort zone, maybe someone that is a bit younger, etc. So include them in that list, sort of my mental list. Yeah. And I always want to make sure that that mental list also has a very good gender balance. And then from that mental list, I choose the speaker, I choose the chairperson or the shortlist for the presiding arbitrator. And at that stage, I could not care less if that was a man or a woman or where that person came from. At that stage, I only want the best person for the job. But I want to make sure that in my selection process, I have a pool of people that is not unduly restricted. And that I found was a really, really helpful, simple rule that makes, I think, most decisions better, because you make sure that you include people. And very often I find that this think again sort of second part of my list includes people that are better matched to the specific job I need, because they have the specific skills where I need to think a little bit more.
I think it's a very interesting example, which in all these discussions about the pledge, we always talk about, or people tend to talk about, well, what can somebody else do? And for me, it is really about what can you do yourself? And they are often little tricks or little tools, and forcing yourself to think a bit about outside the box is the way forward, I suppose. For the LCA, what we have done is, similarly, in our internal systems, if you produce a list of candidates, whether it is to populate a panel at an event or on a list of potential arbitrators, we tick off various boxes. Is there a barrister on the list? Is there a solicitor on the list? Is there a woman on the list? Is there a man on the list? Is there somebody more junior, more senior? That's your long list. And then it should obviously never go at the expense of merits, but you force yourself by having a few rules to be perhaps a bit more creative. Finally, perhaps I don't want to end with something negative, but something where we could perhaps use a bit of a trick or a tool is we have seen many women going into the legal profession. I'm sure you see this very much at Queen Mary. If you look at the statistics of young women entering the legal profession, the numbers are very promising. And if you then follow them through their careers, the numbers get, more and more discouraging. The pipeline leak. What can we do about that?
Well, when I was in law school, admittedly some time ago, I thought it was a matter of time, that you would just need to wait until all these bright young female lawyers that were studying with me or being a junior associate with me would we would progress and get older and become more senior, and that time would resolve the issue. And I really don't think that that's the case. I don't think that time is enough and time will be able to resolve this. I'm not sure I have a sort of magical solution to this, but I think it is a debate that should interest and hopefully interests more and more people. When it comes to, for instance, appointing arbitrators or senior women partners in law firms, I think it is important that this is more inclusive, and it's good for the corporate culture. It's good for the company itself. And I had an interesting experience at a conference, international arbitration conference recently, where indeed there was a sort of post-conference dinner. There were a couple of people sitting around the table from across the board in international arbitration. And we had this debate. We already had a couple of glasses of wine. We had this debate about diversity, and people were saying exactly that we should make the system work for everyone. We should make sure that we don't cut off 50% and therefore potentially some of the best people. And that all the studies show that this is much better for the cultural environment and also in terms of economics for a company. And I was sort of listening, and after a while I realized that the people who were driving that discussion were actually the male colleagues around the table, and not necessarily only the female colleagues. And this is where I thought this is where it actually needs to be. This is not a discussion that is only interesting for women. This is actually a discussion that is interesting and important for the community as a whole to make it work.
When people all realize it affects them and not just the others, it's their problem, not other people's problem, I think you have made the change that is needed. Well, thank you very much, Maxi, for being here today. I look forward to revisiting possibly another 2.5 years. We will have to create another opportunity. Thank you very much for your answers.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jackie.